Well, we are beginning a brand new message series that we have entitled Foundations. We've stolen this name from the book that we're using kind of as a guide for this time of reading through the New Testament. Statistically, the number of people who have opened their Bible is pretty low. The number of people who have opened their Bible and read anything of Scripture is even lower. And the number of people who, even among Christians, who have read the entirety of the New Testament is saddeningly pretty low. So as we talk about how we as people who claim to be followers of Christ, how do we build on this life when we don't even know the foundational truths of who Jesus was, what he taught, what that looked like to respond to Jesus, what the call of repentance looks like, what it means to trust and obey this Jesus that we claim to follow, but we haven't even taken the time to read the words. And I don't mean that as like a condemning word. It's more of an encouraging, like, let's do this together. Because if we had to do a show of hands from all those that were online this morning of who hadn't read through the entirety of the New Testament, chances are there wouldn't be very many hands poking up through the clouds. Even for those of us here, chances are if you've read through the New Testament, you are among a few. And so as a church, we want to say, how do we encourage you to go deep in Jesus and out with that truth if you haven't read the words? And so that's why we've made it an initiative, a direction that we want to take things this year in 2021. We want to be people who look into the Word and allow that to transform us. And so we're using this word foundations because the reality is when you're building something, whether it's a church replant or just anything in general, the best place to start is the foundation. And everything has some type of foundation. The question is, how solid is that foundation? In the 12th century in Italy, they began to build this bell tower, which now we know famously as the Leaning Tower of Pisa. When they started to build it in the 12th century, it wasn't titled the Leaning Tower of Pisa, it was the Tower of Pisa. But as they began to build it, this 150-foot tower, it began to lean, even as it was being built. Why? Because the foundation wasn't good. Because the foundation was moving, the ground began to sink. And over the next 100 and some years, as they built this tower, they tried to compensate. I don't know if you can kind of see the curve. It's like towards the top, it starts to curve up. They tried to make one end longer to fix it. But it really doesn't matter when the foundation isn't good. There's really no way that you can make up for those differences. There's numbers of other architectural failures, ways that things have been built that the foundation did not allow for it to thrive and survive. The fact that the Leaning Tower of Pisa is still existing is a marvel in and of itself. But it didn't set out to be this leaning tower. If they would have known how much of a tourist attraction it might have been, maybe they would have set out to make it lean in the beginning. But the foundation that it was built upon did not support the weight and the creation of what it was. So as we talk about this morning, foundations in the New Testament is why we're taking the next 11 months to read through the New Testament, why we're encouraging community groups to read through this together and to make this the focus of our times together, why we're encouraging each of you, if you're not signed up to be in a community group, why there's still time, because we think this is foundational. This is the difference between you being the Leaning Tower of Pisa, who aren't reflecting the grandeur of how you were designed to be created, and something that does have that. Friends, as you and I walk in this relationship with Jesus, as we go through life, this is not the goal, to go through life as the Leaning Tower of Pisa, just one strong windstorm away from toppling over. This morning we're going to be in Luke chapter 6, and I would encourage you to grab a Bible, whether it's the one on the seat in front of you or the one that you're sitting on, or if you're at home, open up a new tab or pull out your Bible off the shelf. But we're going to be in Luke chapter 6. And throughout this series on Foundations, we're going to be kind of parallel to what you're reading. This week will be ahead. Next week will be right in line. Other weeks we'll be taking snapshots of Luke. Not preaching through all of Luke, but catching a few glimpses here. And as we pick up here in Luke 6, Jesus is talking about foundations. And so it just seemed like the fitting place to begin. We're going to be in Luke chapter 6, beginning in verse 43. And just to give you a little bit of background on what Jesus is talking about, here in chapter 6, as he has just called his disciples, he's beginning to teach them. And as he does throughout Luke, he teaches about this backwards kingdom. This kingdom that actually is in line with how God created the world and meant to bring order out of this chaos, but how because of the fall, because of our rebellion and our sin, we had grown accustomed to a kingdom that was backwards to God's standards. So Jesus shows up on the scene and he says, here's what you're used to. Here's how the religious leaders have taught you. Here's what you think life is about, but let me flip the script on you for you and show you how my kingdom that I'm initiating in is backwards. Let me teach you how God's way is totally different than what you're used to. It's here in Luke 6 where we hear that Jesus says, blessed are you when you're hungry, when you're poor, when you feel tired and worn out. And then he says, woe to you who are full, woe to you who have life every way that you can imagine it. He says, because you have flipped the script, you've chosen to cling on to the things that do not matter, the things that are temporary, the things that will lead you leaning because your foundation is on what you can get rather than on what really eternally matters. And it's with that backdrop of Jesus flipping the script, and he's been laying into the religious leaders of the day, the people who were supposed to be leading the normal people like you and I to be awaiting the Messiah. The people who weren't trained in this to wait and to hope and to see clearly when Jesus showed up on the scene as he was the Messiah. He was the one fulfilling the promises. But yet the religious leaders had done everything they could to obscure that, to make it all about themselves and to get full and to find happiness temporarily in what they as leaders could pull out of the people. And so it's that backdrop here in Luke chapter 6, beginning in verse 43, that Jesus says this, for no good tree bears bad fruit, nor again does a bad tree bear good fruit, for each tree is known by its fruit. For figs are not gathered from thorn bushes, nor are grapes gathered from a bramble bush. The good person out of the good treasure of his heart produces good, and the evil person out of his evil treasure produces evil. For out of the abundance of the heart his mouth speaks. Some different translations say, out of the overflow of his heart, his mouth speaks. We get this picture here, and we see this, right? Like, you don't go to an apple tree and expect to get oranges. You don't go to an orange tree and expect to get bananas. No, we recognize that a cherry tree produces cherries. And Jesus is saying the same thing. A good tree, a tree that has good roots, a tree that is built well, has good fruit. And a bad tree is one that produces bad fruit. He's pointing this back at these religious leaders, but also starting to wrap in everybody else who was listening, all his disciples, all those who were hearing these words and feeling like, yeah, Jesus, you get those bad religious leaders. Yeah, they're naughty. Yep. Because they're starting to say, but wait, because I can see a little bit of myself in what Jesus is talking about. Jesus is calling into this picture the fact that it's not about the outside, it's not about the appearances, it's not about what show you can put on, it's not about looking like you've got it all together. Realistically, the issue is your heart. The very foundation of who you are is what matters, because it's out of that overflow that your actions come and your words truly come. It's out of that overflow of what your heart is, of what your foundation is, that you actually live. How you actually respond. So often we think about life as about putting on a show and looking good to the right people, about getting the most of what we can. Jesus flips the script, and he shows that our words and our actions reveal our heart. Our words and our actions reveal our heart. The fruit of our life, the fruit of what our foundation is, the fruit of our heart is the words and actions that come out of it. Not about what show you can trick other people into believing about who you are. In this, Jesus isn't saying, try harder to do things that look better. No, Jesus is using this to be a mirror back to them and say, why are you trying to fix the surface things when the real thing that needs fixed is your heart? The root of the problem is literally the root. Your heart is what needs to be changed. In fact, Jesus in the very next verse keeps going with this. And he says, Why do you call me Lord, Lord, and do not do what I tell you? He says, every tree is seen by its fruit. Out of the overflow of your heart is what your actions and your words say. But yet you call me Lord, Lord, but I know what's going on in your heart. He says, you're trying to put on this good fruit. You're trying to make it look like I'm actually the one that you are going to obey. He says, but I know your heart. Why do you call me Lord, Lord? Why do you try to put on this fruit that clearly is bad fruit? Because you're simply just saying these right words. And everybody in the room, everybody that's hearing this is going, oh, now I'm cut to the heart. Now I'm cut to it. Now Jesus isn't just talking about the religious leaders. This is getting real, and this is getting serious. Because Jesus is going to call them to ask what their life is built upon. He continues here in 47, everyone who comes to me and hears my words and does them, I will show you what he is like. He is like a man building a house who dug deep and laid the foundation on the rock. And when a flood arose, the stream broke against that house and could not shake it because it had been well built. But the one who hears and does not do them is like a man who built a house on the ground without a foundation. When the stream broke against it, immediately it fell, and the ruin of that house was very great. Friends, Jesus asked those who listen, and he asks us today, what are you building your life upon? What is the foundation that you're building your life upon? Is it something that's rock solid, or is it something that is loose, something that is temporary, something that is going to fail when the storms come? I don't know if you caught that, but Jesus doesn't say if a flood came. He says when a flood came, when a flood arose, when the stream welled up, when the storms of life happen. Not if, but when. Because what is going to reveal the foundation, what reveals our heart is the words that our mouth speaks and the actions that we have. What reveals our foundation and the true heart that we have is the storms of life around us. Just a chapter earlier in Luke 5, Peter has this encounter with Jesus, and they're out fishing. And Peter, by all standards, is an excellent, expert fisherman. He knows the trade. He knows the space that he's in. That he knows fishing. And Jesus is with him, and Jesus doesn't know fishing. Peter could hold up his doctorate degree in fishing, and Jesus is like, this is my first time out here. And they've tried all night. And Peter and his crew have not caught a single fish. And it's frustrating. It's got to be a little bit humiliating. And what happens is Jesus shows up on the scene and he says, why don't you try again? Throw your nets over the other side of the boat. And Peter's response to him is, Master. Like, I'll give you a little bit of respect, but really I'm just playing your game. And the word that he says is master, but it's really is just some more of a, I'm going to go along with this because I'm tired and I don't want to fight you on this. And if you know the story, if you've read Luke 5, they toss over the nets, and it becomes so much of a load. They catch so many fish that they have to call their partners over. They're tossing fish into that boat. Both boats are beginning to sink. It is incredible, something that the expert fisherman has never seen before. And Peter's response flips because he uses the exact same word, but an entirely different meaning. It goes from this respect of like, okay, you know what, crazy guy that I'll obey, into Lord. Lord, Master, Commander, the one that I will follow. And Peter's response is actually, get away from me because I recognize how sinful I am. And Peter's view begins to recognize that Jesus, he doesn't see it clearly until the resurrection, but Peter begins to understand that there is something different about Jesus. That he is the source of divinity, that he is the source of life, true life. And so sometimes it's a reorienting in our lives. It's a reorienting work that has to be done. It's laying aside our abilities and our expertise to see what Jesus is doing and to follow that. Peter changed from this begrudging response of Lord to a faithful response, seeing Jesus as to who he truly was. See, it's possible for you and I to be amazed by Jesus. It's possible for us to be just kind of entertained by Jesus, to be impressed by him, and to like what he does. It's possible for us to be complacent. Hey, I'll play your game. I'll go through the motions. Sure, crazy Jesus, I'll toss the net over the boat. But that's not the full thing. That's building our house on the sand. And that's only going to get you so far. That's only going to provide so much perfection. The real essence of knowing Jesus as the foundation, the Lord, is our obedience, our trust. Our role in placing Jesus as the foundation of our lives is trust and obedience. The first step in having a foundation that lasts is placing Christ at the foundation of our relationship with God. And I want to begin to unpack this for you and how to build and maintain this solid foundation. Because none of us, if we're realistic, want to have at the end of our life placed on our tombstone Luke 6:49. He built his house on sand and it came at great peril. It came as a great failure. No one wants their life legacy to be, wow, what a disaster. No, we all want a life that says, man, he lived that to the glory of God. Man, he lived that to a lasting legacy. Other people benefited because of his benevolence and his kindness and his hope. Lives were changed because of the way that he trusted Jesus. That's what I want for my life, and that's what I think you honestly want for your life. Because as we saw last week, he who dies with the most toys doesn't win. It really is about what we do with this time that we have, what we do with what we do have, and what we're building upon. So for some of you this morning, it's how to build this relationship, how to build and maintain a solid foundation. For others, it's a maintenance mode. How do we maintain this solid foundation? And the core is, as we see from Jesus' words in Luke 6, come intentionally. Come intentionally. Look at 6, verse 47. Jesus says, everyone who comes to me and hears my word and does them, I will show you what he is like. A man who builds this house on a solid foundation, a woman who builds her life on a solid foundation, is somebody who comes intentionally, someone who comes expectantly, someone who says, I'm coming to Jesus. That's not the honor. Friends, the honor is that we receive from God what he has already done through Jesus. That when we come to Jesus, it's not, hey, Jesus, look how I climbed like 7 mountains to get to you. No, it's when we come intentionally to receive what God has already done through Jesus Christ. Jesus says the first thing is someone who comes to him, that has placed their confidence in him, that has made the choice, that has recognized that Jesus is the destination, not simply a product that we use to get what we want out of life. We come intentionally to Jesus. Without getting too nerdy for you, when Jesus is sharing this in Luke 6, he's also pointing those who are hearing it back to Isaiah 28. Back to this prophecy that Isaiah had about how, because they had placed their trust in Egypt to help them politically out of a situation, and rather than trusting God, they were going to see ruin. And we see these same words, we see these same pictures of cornerstone. We see the same picture of this God who says he will provide for them. That because they had chosen to reject God, they had abandoned God's plan rather than trusting in him. They had rejected his word, and they had sought a temporary foundation for their life. But when we come intentionally, we're saying no to this casual acceptance of Jesus. We're saying yes to choosing to come to Jesus, to receive what has already been extended to us. Friends, if you're here this morning, whether online or in person with us this morning, if you're someone who does not know what has been extended to you, let me make this very simple. That God saw you in your muck, in your pain, in your hurt, in your loss, in your own sin, and he didn't abandon you, but he extended himself to you to have a relationship with you restored through Jesus. And that when we enter into this relationship with Jesus, we accept what he has done on our behalf. That when we come to Jesus, we're receiving that and saying, Jesus' death and resurrection changed everything for me. Not just so that there's a foundation that I can live on, but it changed the trajectory of my life. So that my life does not end in ruin and end, but instead there's eternal life with God that begins today. That this relationship is offered to me, not because I've done a lot of good things, but simply because I'm receiving what God has already done on my behalf through Jesus. Jesus says the way that we build and maintain a solid foundation is that we come intentionally to Jesus, recognizing that he is the destination in that. That Jesus is our everything. And that's the way we maintain it as well. Friends, the moment that you and I, as we enter into a relationship with God, change the trajectory of this, the moment that we believe that Jesus doesn't matter so much, that foundation begins to crumble. But the day that we begin to allow the gospel to continually speak into our lives and transform us is the days that we have this solid foundation. Because the second thing that Jesus says is that we come to grow. A man and a woman who builds their house on a solid foundation is somebody who does the hard work of laying aside themselves and coming to Jesus, and then they say, I want to grow. Luke 6:47. Everyone who comes to me and hears my word. We position ourselves to want to grow, to hear these words. We come expectantly. We come humbly. We don't just turn it on in the background and I hope it, like by osmosis, does something in me. But it's a choice to come to Jesus and allow him and allow his words to transform us. We come intentionally, we come to grow, and then we come to obey. If we want to build a solid foundation that will last forever, if you want a life that leaves a legacy to the glory of God, we come intentionally, we come to grow, and we come to obey. Because Jesus, that's what Jesus says. It's somebody who puts them into practice. It's somebody who actually does them. Because it's not enough to come to Jesus and say, hey, I want to receive this. It's not enough to come to Jesus and say, hey, I want to grow. What truly matters is that third piece of actually obeying. Because as you step out and obey, you're communicating this trust. You're actually living into this. Those of you that have children, you will not be satisfied if your children come to you and you say, hey, we have this list of chores to do. You will not be satisfied if they just come to you and hear the list. You tell them to go clean their room and they're like, okay, I got you. That's not what you're looking for, right? You're actually asking them to go up to their room, to pack up their toys, to put the books back on the shelf, to throw away the old snack wrappers. You're asking them to come, to hear, and then to actually do it. And that's what God calls us to. He calls us to come to him, to trust him, to hear his words, and then to step out in obedience to actually do them. Following Jesus is not just about having the right words. It's not about having ethical behavior. It's not about getting straight A's or looking like you're doing the right thing. It's not even about religious practice. The mark of true followers of Jesus is whether they do what Jesus says. I've always heard it as being in a garage doesn't make you a car. I think JL used being in a taco shop doesn't make you a taco or something. I like that one better. Simply coming to church doesn't make you have this solid foundation. It positions you to hear it. But friends, if we walk out these doors, if we open up the Bible and we read the words of God, but we don't actually put them into practice and do them, friends, we are the ones to be pitied because we have fooled ourselves and we have built our lives on a foundation like sinking sand that will just wash away. One of the other beautiful pictures of Isaiah 28 that Jesus connects here to is that this promise that God is making through Isaiah centuries earlier, this picture of shelter, of a foundation, of having a cornerstone, is that it is a sanctuary. That not only do we see, as in Luke 6 here, that it's something that when the storms come, there's safety and doesn't wash away. You're not devastated by it. But this picture of sanctuary, of shelter, and more so, it's the presence of God. Friends, Jesus is unleashing this picture not just about you do enough right things and that's obedience and hey, you have a nice life. But captured in this, in Luke 6, and drawing itself all the way back to the Old Testament in Isaiah 28, and all the way back to creation, is this picture that God doesn't just give us a bunch of things to do. We aren't just about proving that we love God, but it's the reminder that God gives us His presence. That as we build our lives on a foundation that is solid, as we come to Him intentionally, as we come to grow and this desire to be transformed, as we come to obey and step into what we are called to do, that God meets us there in His presence. That God offers it, that this is not an add-on, but this is the sole purpose, is that we are able to commune with God and to be in real relationship with Him. If we respond and obey, He will be a sanctuary to us, a source of safety and security. The storms will still come. Jesus doesn't say, hey, if you build your house on a solid foundation, the storms will never come. Like, it's not like that this somehow creates a force field that the storms just stay away from. But He says, when the storms come, the storms will come. There's never a doubt in Jesus' mind. But He says, when they do come, you will find that you're protected. He doesn't say it's because of your own ability or your own expertise. He doesn't say it's because you're smarter. He doesn't say it's because you somehow have the power or that you knew the right words. I mean, think about this. Next time it rains, try to go outside and tell the rain to move. You can't even tell a couple raindrops, let alone a torrent of storms, of a flood, to move. And obviously, Jesus is just using this as a picture. It's not about just a literal water flood. He's talking about all the chaos of our lives, the uncertainty that we've seen rampant in the last year, the heartbreak that many of you have experienced over the last 18 months and beyond. Right? These storms that are coming, what is your foundation? It's not because of our ethical behavior. It's not because you do good things. It's not because of religious practice that, I went to church this week, or I was part of a community group, or I read all 5 days this week. I memorized these verses. I can quote the list of the books of the Bible backwards. It's not about religious practice. It's about putting the words of Jesus into practice. God is calling you and I to place our hope and our trust in Jesus, which we do by obedience because He has already established Himself. If we respond, we will find God to be a safety and a holy place, a place where our souls are ministered to and we are able to meet with God. See, this isn't just about protection in the temporary. When the storms come, and we will not only find protection, but we will find the very presence of the Lord. And this is why our first priority is to seek Jesus. Everything else is secondary. Our first priority is to seek Jesus, and everything else is secondary because everything else is trying to bend the Leaning Tower of Pisa back. Everything else is about trying to hide the fact that it's leaning so badly. How do we fix this? Everything else is just surface. Everything else is just paint on the exterior. But our first priority is to seek Jesus because that is the foundation work. And friends, again, if we sound like a broken record, we encourage you. We cannot say enough how deeply we want you to join us in this year of reading through the New Testament. Not because it's magical and, if you do 5 days a week, you're going to get more stars in heaven. No. It's because in that we're going to experience the presence of God. In that you will come alive in more of a rich and passionate way because your foundation will be built upon God. You will find in that His presence as you come intentionally, choosing to engage with His Word, choosing to hear it and grow, choosing to put it into practice and to do that. Friends, that may be your step. We just finished up a series where we talked about one. What is the one thing in 2021 that God is calling you to? What is the one thing this week that God is calling you to begin to do? To place Jesus as the foundation for your life. So I just want to leave you with that. What one step can you take this week to make Jesus the foundation of your life? To make Jesus the foundation of your decisions, to make Jesus the foundation of your marriage. When you look about your family and you think about the children or the grandchildren that you're raising, what is the one step you can begin to take to make Jesus the foundation of your family? What is the one step that you can begin to take to align your heart with His? So that out of the overflow of your heart, your mouth, your actions will reflect that your foundation is in God Himself. Your foundation is upon Jesus, who will never disappoint, who will never fail. Because we serve a very loving and faithful God.